Our cover story tonight is about a man who hated India. I'm talking about the controversial figure that was Henry Kissinger, the American diplomat who has passed away at the age of 100. As the world comes to grip with his passing, one cannot ignore his checkered past. Kissinger has been a big player in many of the most important events of the world and has been awarded the Nobel Peace Prize for that. But at the same time, has been called a war criminal. Why is that? To understand this, we need to do a deep dive into Henry Kissinger's complex legacy. Kissinger was known for his disdain towards India's leadership in the 1970s. Many of his racist, misogynistic statements for the then Prime Minister Indira Gandhi cannot even be repeated. His ties with India started in the 1970s. At the time, he was both the National Security Advisor as well as the Secretary of State. And during the 1971 war between Bangladesh and Pakistan, Kissinger reportedly used a sexist slur to describe the former Indian Prime Minister. Declassified taped conversations between former US President Richard Nixon and Secretary of State Kissinger shortly before the war would reveal their hatred for India. The expletive he used for Indians cannot be said on air, but most of you would know what I'm talking about. Of course, decades later, he would express regret over his comments. Despite his attempt to damage control, the tapes have become a part of his legacy, a proof of his disregard for human rights abuses in the then East Pakistan. But history remembers, during the 1971 Pakistan-Bangladesh war, the Nixon administration was concerned about the spread of Soviet influence in India. India, of course, had good ties with USSR. To counter this, the US started reaching out to China through Pakistan. At the time, Washington feared that responding to the atrocities that were taking place in East Pakistan by the Pakistani army would block this outreach. And so, in order to save their own interests, Nixon and Kissinger turned a blind eye to the traumatic experiences of the Bengalis in East Pakistan. The Pakistan army was carrying out human rights violations against Bengalis who were demanding independence. He knew about this. Yet, Nixon turned the other way. And in this, his accomplice was Kissinger. According to Kissinger, the Indian leadership was responsible for the refugee flow. He condemned India as a whole. In the tapes, his voice oozed with contempt. Quote unquote, they are a scavenging people. That is how he described India. And it does not stop there, by the way. According to the declassified documents and tapes, Nixon and Kissinger had described India as a quote unquote Soviet stooge. In fact, after Bangladesh was formed, Kissinger told Nixon that he had saved West Pakistan. Later that year, they decided to send US warships into the Bay of Bengal to threaten and intimidate India. In December that year, Kissinger also encouraged the Chinese to take action against India. The documents shared by the US National Security Archive showing how Kissinger guaranteed China US support. Kissinger had done his best to provoke China to make things difficult for India. Obviously, he never admitted it. One of the reasons why Nixon made his famous secret trip to China in 1972, masterminded by Kissinger himself, was to win over Beijing to the USS side and pit it against India. Even during the 1971 war, both Nixon and Kissinger expressed hope in private that China would do something along the Indian border so that it would rattle New Delhi. It was only after the end of the Cold War and after India emerged as a strong power that Kissinger's views against India changed. He advocated strong ties with India. He admitted that the Cold War and the war before Bangladesh was formed had pushed India and the US to the edge of confrontations. By 2008, He called India an ally of the US. In his own words, no two countries now are better situated to evolve their friendship. In the year 2018, during a leadership summit of the India-US Partnership Forum, Kissinger said, "When I think about India, I admire their strategy." And after Prime Minister Modi came to power in 2014, Kissinger started advocating greater US-India ties. Early this year, when Prime Minister Modi visited the US for a state visit, Kissinger is said to have traveled to Washington to hear him talk. Clearly, a lot has changed. Ties between strategic partners, India and the US, have never been better, dramatically different from those in Nixon's era. Yet, one cannot forget the racist, insulting and just generally hate-filled comments towards India, of course, many of which we have decided not to repeat tonight. Kissinger went from speaking of India with disdain to finally acknowledging India's growing importance in global politics. And perhaps that is the big takeaway in all of this. WION now available in your country. Download the app now. Get all the updates on the move.